We're going live.
Yeah, all right. This is gonna be fun.
This will be good. You got your
Got my G&T right here. You got yours?
Yep, just some good old whiskey.
Let's
All right,
do it.
let's do this. Hello, everybody.
Hey.
It's weird to jump on without intro music.
Yeah.
But this is the inaugural live stream of Versus, which is the very first, I think, live call-in debate show where the hosts talk to each other in the same way that we would talk to callers if they called in on Sunday.
Yeah. It's definitely a novel idea, and I'm excited to try it out for sure.
Absolutely. We are also, oh yeah, you left the fan on, didn't you?
I did. There we go. That should be better.
I was like, there's a little bit of noise in the background.
Sorry.
And I can't.
I'm a warm body. I'm always.
I'm in.
I have
denim,
no idea how you
and
do
I'm
that.
fine. Oh my gosh. Hi, everybody. In case you don't know who we are or what else we do, I'm Bianca.
I'm Eric Murphy.
And we're the hosts of Skeptic Generation every Sunday at 11:30 a.m. It's a live call-in show where people call in to talk about their deeply held beliefs. And today we are doing something a little different. That said, I do want to make sure you guys know the call-in number works. It's not going to be long-form conversation, but if we are having a conversation, face-off, whatever you want to call it, I know you don't like using the term debate because it's too formal.
Yeah, well, I mean, debates have the whole, 15-minute intro, then rebuttals and closing statements.
Well, the Oxford debate is structured in that way, but that's a specific type. Like, there are presidential debates, which I feel like this is probably a lot more like.
So...
We're debating the definition of debate before we debate.
Yeah, so here's
Inception.
the thing. For those of you who don't know, V and I have been in a very happy, loving relationship for a while.
Over 2 years.
Yeah. And one of the things that we really, really love about this relationship is that we get to have these long arguments about minute, details about these really, really abstract concepts. And we'll have them for days and days on end. So this isn't new for us.
No.
But we've always kind of joked around and talked about opening this up to the camera so people can see these discussions had. And what an inaugural topic.
Yeah, for real. What is consciousness and does it even exist?
This was one of those things that I remember the very first time you brought it up, I was just like, we're gonna need to talk about that.
Yeah, we have, I think we started from very different places. This is not the very first time we're talking about this, full disclosure. I'm sure that in the future there will be topics that we have not talked about at length that we'll kind of dive into for the first time on the show. But it also kind of helps to have a background in, okay, I kind of understand where Eric's coming from, and he kind of understands where I'm coming from. And we'll do our best to make sure that everybody's caught up. We'll be watching the live chat as well. Mm-hmm. Speaking of live chat, one of the reasons that we're doing this is to raise money for a new computer and a producer, which are our two goals for 2022. So we can expand the studio, make it look really nice, and get somebody to help us on the technical end of things. So any super chats, any money that we get from this episode tonight, we are going to put directly towards that computer. So if you're interested in helping us get there faster, seeing a new studio, growing the crew of Skeptic Generation by one, not a cat, unfortunately, yet, then please feel free to shoot us a super chat. We'll always read those at the end of the episode or the live stream. And yeah, just be nice and call in if you think one of us is full of shit, and we will
I'm
will
so
respond.
full of shit, my eyes are brown.
Yeah, my mom got that told to her too all the time.
Yeah?
Yeah. It stuck with her. She did not like that.
I love
no.
Well, it kind of goes back to what we do, It's I don't know. It takes me to History of the World Part 1 that, what do you do? Oh, I'm a stand-up philosopher. Oh, you're a bullshit artist.
A bullshit artist. A stand-up philosopher, huh?
Yeah.
I like that. I want to be one of those. Speaking of, just shout out tonight. I am drinking Yellow Spot, which was a Christmas gift from Andrew Seidel. So Thank you
Yeah.
so much for that. This will be fueling me for the evening.
I'm rocking gin and tonic because that is my thing. Anywhere I go, any convention I've gone to, even the seediest bars, it is so difficult to screw up a gin and tonic.
That's why I go with straight whiskey. There's really very little you can do.
See, yeah, but the thing is, it's still whiskey.
Fair. We might have to debate that at some point.
But first, while we're getting into this, how would you like to kick this off?
I would love to kick this off by shouting out the number one more time. That's 585-526-8774. Or you can call in using the link tiny.cc/callSG. Again, keep them short, give your 2 cents, and then we're going to move on to the next topic or take your feedback into account. So it's not going to be long conversations, but we want you to weigh in and tell us what you think about where the debate is going.
Yeah.
All right, so I have these.
You created these.
I did. So let's talk about this first one. And we won't keep this up on the screen forever because it cuts off
Most of us.
Most of us.
Yeah.
But the first question, if you know anything about us, then you would know that we like to define things, and that is kind of the place that we start, making sure we're sharing definitions or at least coming to a topic using a shared definition for the purpose of communicating. We don't necessarily have to believe that that is the true definition all the time.
As long as it's functional so that we can engage in a meaningful dialogue, that's what's important.
Yes, exactly. All right, so Eric,
Yes.
how would you define consciousness?
How much time do we have? How much time can I put into this?
We're going to be here for probably about as long as we are on a Sunday show, maybe a little bit longer if we
Cool.
get boozed up.
Okay.
So I'm curious how you would define consciousness. And this is not something I've thought about. I don't have an answer for you myself. So I'm going to be curious how you define this.
Okay. Well, I'm going to kind of start as far back into the beginning as I can so that people can come along with me for the ride. When it comes to consciousness,
I was born in
1987. Oh, God. Anyway, sorry. I just,
A little bit of a crisis there.
I'm like 11. No, I'm like 3 years out from my high school's 20th, 20-year reunion.
Their 20th 20-year reunion.
Haha. You know what I mean?
They're old.
Shut up.
Okay.
Okay.
Consciousness.
It's consciousness. I just tried to adjust my glasses. Sorry. Where I would go with consciousness is I first need to preface this that my experience with consciousness and my experience with the topic of consciousness probably isn't the same as everybody else's. And because of that, I'm bringing a lot of baggage to the table.
Are you saying you have a unique experience of consciousness?
No, I'm not that special. Anyway, consciousness is really fluid, and it often takes on a lot of different awkward properties depending on how you phrase, your definition. And so let's start by talking about what it isn't. When I think of not consciousness, can a person be not conscious? Yes.
Depending on how you define consciousness.
Well, I think unconscious is a pretty good place to start.
Well,
So,
possibly.
Yeah.
Possibly.
And so when I start at unconscious, I go, okay, well, there are vital systems in a person's body that are still functioning. The lights are on, but nobody's home. And so if I go down that path, then it helps clear up a lot.
Okay.
So I think I would define consciousness in the same way that I would talk about any other event or process. Consciousness is cumulative. It is the sum of your ability to take input and process that and process that information. I think that there are varying degrees of consciousness. I think that there are, lower level consciousness with, creatures that have, that like I think dogs are conscious. I think rodents are conscious, but I don't think they're as complex as we are.
So at its most base level, what things are necessary to have consciousness? Like we can then dive into, what other things might be added to make it more complex. But at its base level, what do you consider to be the fundamental attributes of consciousness?
So I think that's putting the cart before the horse. I think consciousness is the label that we ascribe to the emergent property we find when it comes to all of these systems running at the same time. Your sense of sight, sound, smell, touch, everything your body is taking in as far as stimuli is concerned. Processing that is consciousness. And so when we talk about does consciousness exist, it's an event. It's a thing that's happening. So if I talk about like an oven that's baking, I would say, does baking exist? The process does.
Yeah.
And also, if I'm going to say that, baking something in an oven, baking can happen as long as the tools are tools necessary for it are in place.
Right.
And so without those tools, you're not going to get that process. And so, yes, it exists, but also no, I will not grant that it exists. Because something existing as a concept is not what people mean when they're talking about consciousness existing. And that's where the baggage comes in.
Well, okay. So we moved from definition to whether or not it exists, which we can totally do. But my question is, there's a difference between a process and a concept, though. Like a process is something that is clearly demonstrable is happening due to tools and things interacting with the world, like baking. You can prove that baking is happening.
Yeah, but if I bake...
It's not just a concept.
Okay.
So if you were to say consciousness is a process, I like that. I think that's very interesting. That would preclude it from the conversation around, is it just a concept? No. So I don't think we need to even go there.
Okay, as long as I know that another argument that we generally have is around the word existence, and so that's difficult.
Oh, we'll get into existence.
Yeah. So why are we talking about consciousness? Why is that important to anybody? Why would anybody give a crap? Can I give that, or do we want to go talk about your definition of consciousness? How do you want to do this?
Yeah. I think that the people who are here are interested in the topic, and so are we, and that's kind of why we're talking about it. We are going to have a question later on about its importance and whether or not it should be more important or less important as a conversation. So we'll get into that for sure.
Okay.
But I kind of want to play off of what you said about a process.
Okay.
So you mentioned the 5 senses, 5 being the big ones, obviously. How many of those can go away before you're not conscious anymore?
All of them.
Okay, so 5 senses don't count.
That's where it gets sticky.
Okay.
So
if they are not, and forgive me for using the word, but intrinsic to the definition of consciousness, then I'm not considering them in that base definition of consciousness. They can overlap, they can coincide, they might be there most of the time, but I don't think that I would grant that they are necessary for consciousness.
I disagree, but not on strong terms, and I'm hesitant there. It kind of makes me think of that statement, "What is a sandwich?" Mm-hmm. Is a pizza a sandwich?
No, there's no top.
Depending on the right. I appreciate that, but is a hot dog a sandwich? What is a pizza? That like people play those games because you can keep swapping things out and still maintain that definition. And so it's fuzzy. It's fuzzy. I could not imagine someone, like would I say that Helen Keller was less conscious? No, not at all. Helen Keller was just limited in her ability to communicate. Mm-hmm. But any sense data that she was bringing in, she was definitely, processing that data and making sense of it and understanding it and then making decisions based off of that information.
Okay, cool. So it's data processing and the ability to synthesize that data and then recontextualize and communicate it back? Because that's communication.
Well, so it's
but can
difficult.
there be communication without consciousness?
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Well, no.
No? You don't think your computer
Ooh,
can?
no.
Oh,
no.
wow. Holy crap.
Okay, hit me on. Let me hit you with this.
Okay.
What if it's not communication? What if communication is from a sender that is intentionally encoding a thing to a receiver who is, decoding that thing?
Okay.
And so, if there's no intent by the encoder, then the fact that the receiver can get information does not mean that it's communication.
Okay.
How about that?
I like that. Are you
Okay.
saying that intent is necessary for consciousness? Or that consciousness is necessary for intent, rather?
Ooh, yeah.
You are?
I'm up for that.
I'm up for it. Sure, let's go for it.
I take things tentatively. I want to play with those ideas and explore it. So
I like this.
Go for it.
I
Where are you
like
going? Yeah.
Well, my obviously the next thing is a computer, right? A computer is built in order to communicate.
Mm-hmm.
And the intention, depending on how we define intention, is there, right? There's a reason the computer is giving you these things that it, quote unquote, knows you are going to receive and interpret and send back.
Mm-hmm.
But a computer wouldn't be conscious.
No.
At least not at this juncture.
No.
So,
Is a telephone conscious?
no.
Okay, so someone designing a computer with intent and that becoming a means of communication means that, yeah, every time I've played a video game on my computer, I think that I've been getting communication, but I don't misattribute it to the computer. I attribute it to the designers of the video game. I mean, there's still intent there.
Okay.
So yeah, no, I'm still sticking with it.
Okay. So,
And by the way, just as an aside, I think that computers could become conscious someday.
oh yeah.
Right? I'm just.
And we're fucked when that happens. But okay. I'm curious about this. This is very interesting to me. So far we've got processing of information, synthesizing that information, and then is communicating part of consciousness? Because I don't think it would be.
No, but I think it's a really good test. And I don't know. I think that the receiving of information and processing that information and building a model of the world with it, I think that's intrinsic to consciousness. Because I think because it's an emergent property of that. Right? Consciousness happens because we have evolved to have all of these different evolutionary advantages, sight, smell, sound, taste, touch, all of it. All of that is because we're trying to make sense of that data so that we can survive. And so it, I think, would follow that is what consciousness is. It is making sense of that data, which is why it's an emergent property of those things.
Okay. Is it... Because I you know where I'm going to go with this.
I do, and I so somebody in the chat said biblical. We're getting there, promise.
And we do have a couple people who are already going to be talking with us, and both of them are theists.
I love it.
Which is really cool. So guys, we're going to ask you to give your two cents, and then we're going to move on. But if you want longer conversations about this, call back on Sunday.
Yeah, we'd love to talk to you more on Sunday if you want to have a back and forth.
Same number. You already got this.
Yeah.
So here's the deal, though. Plants. Plants synthesize data using the senses that plants have, not necessarily sight, sound, taste, but the senses that plants are equipped with. They use those senses to translate data in a way that works for them. So, for example, sound waves impacting growth cycle or light impacting which direction they're facing. Where is the breakdown between that and consciousness if you're not willing to grant that plants are conscious, which I don't think you are?
Oh, I'm not willing to grant that plants are conscious.
Okay.
And I think this has a lot to do with that baking analogy again. If we're talking about baking with an oven, and you say, well, I can take you out to the desert where it's really, really hot, and the conditions are right for you to bake a cake. I think that those two being similar.
A desert cake?
It doesn't
A
take
dessert
away
cake?
from God damn it.
Sorry.
Is the whiskey hitting you already?
I'm always like this.
Yeah, that's fair. Okay. Anyway, where I'm going with this is I think that plants, react, based on stimuli, but I don't think that there is a model being built in a mind. You need to have some kind of rudimentary brain, at least a spinal cord, some method of taking that data and building a model off of it, understanding the world around you. A purely reactive thing may give the illusion of consciousness.
So how do we determine what understands the world around it and what does not? If communication is not a component of consciousness, how do we know if something is understanding the world around it?
Okay. Now, this is where we need to get into religion, and this is where we need to get into a lot more of that, because without it, we can't keep going with this conversation.
Okay, do we want to take a question real fast?
Sure.
Okay. Jeff, we're bringing you on. You've got a minute. Let's go. Hi, Jeff. Welcome.
Hey, Jeff.
Hey, what's up, V? What's up, Mr. Eric?
How's it
This is
going?
your buddy Jeff.
Hey, Jeff.
Buddy Jeff from Philly.
Nice.
Haven't talked in a while.
Long
got a
time,
minute.
man. Yeah. What are your 2 cents? What do you want to say about consciousness?
Just that I believe it's grounded in the spirit, and that the Bible gives a lot of vocabulary, which gives us understanding of this very topic.
So,
Give us your best verse in the Bible that gives you an understanding of consciousness, and we'll look it up and talk about it for a minute.
I believe it's in Corinthians. You may have to look it up because I don't have the exact number, but
Okay.
basically it says the spirit is the part of you that knows your thoughts.
Okay.
And that I believe is the actual seat of consciousness.
So I want to build on that, but I also don't know where the line is between this show's structure and
Yeah.
where
Right.
we can ask you to call in on Sunday.
No, honestly,
I think I'm gonna have to call you guys
You
back
are.
on Sunday. Probably.
absolutely. In fact, this is great. I would love to talk more about this, especially if we talk a little bit about it after we hang up and you're like, no, they didn't get it. I need to call
Yeah,
back.
correct
Definitely
us.
do that. But thank you, Jeff. We're going to look that up and we're going to read it out and talk about it for a minute. So thanks for your thoughts.
Thank you, Jeff.
Hey, I just want to say in closing, I still love. Oh, wait a minute. No, I like you guys.
Yes!
Talk
Jeff,
to you later.
I'm so happy to hear from you, man. Yeah.
All right, bro.
Take care.
Nice.
Okay, so that was a deep cut for people who haven't followed us for a very long time. Jeff had called in. He'd called in prior shows that we were on, and one of the things that he said is, I just want to tell you I love you. And we kind of discussed how that is reflective of a culture of, wanting to be an example of Christ's love and all of that, but how ultimately it's kind of demeaning. It's demeaning to us because it's inauthentic, and it's putting on a show, that we're not here for. We're here for you. If you don't like us, that's okay. We can take it. But trying to say that you love us isn't great. So the fact that he's stuck around with us for that long and remembered that just made me really happy.
That's awesome. That was awesome. Thanks for calling in, Jeff. And we do hope to hear back from you for sure. So it's 1 Corinthians 2:11. Mm-hmm. And the verse is, "For what man knoweth the things of a man, save the spirit of man which is in him? Even so no man knoweth the things of God, but the Spirit of God." So essentially what I'm taking from that in the KJV version is the Spirit is what you use to know yourself.
So metacognition.
Essentially. And spirit, if we're going to change the word spirit to mind, then
Okay, well,
this is where you wanted to go anyway, I believe.
it is, and this takes setting up because we can't just assume that everybody watching gets this.
Yeah.
So for the majority of times that I've had any kind of talks about consciousness, it was with religious people. It was with people who were saying that there is some soul in the body that's piloting this meat suit. And that would be at the core of consciousness. And I think that is at the core of what our last caller just said, right? Is this idea, and it's called mind-body dualism, that there's a ghost in the machine. And all of these things you can Google and go down rabbit trails on, and it's fantastic. But the context of me talking about this is very careful to make sure that I'm not using definitions loosely, because that's often where bad arguments get their foundation. So when you talk about mind, I'm currently using that as a synonym for consciousness.
Right, in which case it does become a little bit circular to say, what is consciousness? Well, it's consciousness.
It's consciousness, yeah.
So I unless the proposition here is that there is something in addition to one's consciousness to explain consciousness, then it does become a little bit of a vicious circle, which is not very helpful.
No, now if we can use a definition for mind that's different to better, get into, nuance, then sure. But if not, then let's not do that.
Okay, so this is going to be a pattern. Eric and I approach philosophy differently. And weirdly, while I am more pragmatic in the day-to-day, and you're definitely more of an idealist, on this we kind of flip. And you argue philosophical points as though you are arguing them with a dishonest interlocutor.
Oh, I can address that.
That's how I've come across. Like, not that you address that, not that you put me under that scope at all. But when you're thinking about what to grant and what not to grant and how to phrase things.
Yeah, I'm very careful with
You're very
consciousness.
careful because you don't want to ever give anybody any leeway to use that against you later on in an argument.
Well, and just to be clear, that's not me being, obtuse.
No, that's you having a background in debate and talking with apologists and understanding how certain words are used within that context.
Yes.
I totally get it. I
you.
don't do that.
I know. I know, and that is the core of a lot of our discussions. So I've been talking a lot about consciousness. We talked about just briefly on the religious angle to it and why it's interesting to us as counter-apologists. And I've talked a bit about kind of my general understanding of it, but I want to hear yours.
Okay. Ask me a question, because there is a lot there.
Sure. What is consciousness?
Consciousness is, this is going to be useless on a scientific level, because we talked about this before.
And I'm going to drag it there, and as long as you're okay with that, I'm good.
Well, that's the thing. I want to be clear, we are not scientists, and so my goal is to stay as far away from presuming certain scientific realities as possible and keeping it purely in the philosophical realm. The understanding here is that this philosophical, highfalutin, epistemological thing pales in comparison to actual hard scientific evidence that might present itself later or has already. I think in a conversation where we can go, but what if the world did begin to exist? What would that mean? We could have that conversation and have that lead to modal ontological arguments, right? And philosophically, that would be valid, except that it's not. But
philosophically, it would be something we could sink our teeth into.
Exactly. But that doesn't negate the Big Bang, right? So that's kind of a caveat here.
Okay.
So last night we came up with a visual.
Which one?
The wall and the fly fisher.
Oh, yeah, that's right.
Okay, so hear me out. Let me know if this makes any sense.
Should I tell them what the analogy is first? Or are you going to give it?
I'll give the analogy.
Okay.
So we were listening to a interview with Dr. Ian McGilchrist. Did some research on the dude. Don't know much about him, but it was very interesting. He was talking about the different hemispheres of the brain and how they interact with the world and what split brain patients experience in terms of how one side will interpret some things one way and the other side of the brain will interpret them a different way. Very, very interesting stuff. It got us thinking about how weird it is that we don't have access to actual external reality outside of our own brains, right? And
Yeah.
the fact that we don't understand them very well yet. So the analogy that we came up with was reality as an objective fact is out there, and in front of it there is this wall.
Like a partition.
Yeah. This brick wall of our own biology and neurochemistry, right? We cannot get past that wall to the external world because that's just baked in. That's like who we are, that's what we are, we're stuck. But we can throw like a fishing pole line over and grab data and reel it back and try to come up with what is on the other side of the wall using that fly fisher.
Right.
I love that analogy so much.
Yay.
And in that analogy, consciousness is not the fishing pole. Consciousness is not the person using the fishing pole. Consciousness is the awareness of the situation that you are behind a wall gathering data.
Then I think we need another analogy.
Why is that?
Because the entire point of that analogy is to make concepts tangible so that we can talk about them in a more useful way. And I feel like the awareness carries with it a lot of implicit bias towards things that I'm not willing to grant.
Ooh, interesting.
Yeah.
Okay. So can I go into, for a minute, what my approach to philosophy is here? Because I think that it's going to clarify where we're diverging. So you argue philosophy with the intention of being careful about what you grant based on interactions in the past with, apologists or philosophers who would use your terms dishonestly or run with something you granted when you didn't actually mean that thing or whatever. The way that I approach it is a lot less complex, I think. And I don't know if that's good or bad, but I think about things in terms of what I actually believe. And it feels dishonest to me to say that.
Why would you care? That sounds like you're assuming that I don't honestly believe what I'm saying.
Well, from the experiences that I've had, you've been like, oh yeah, I would grant that this existed to you because you understand what I mean about existence, but I wouldn't grant that in any other format because I know that it would be used in this way as opposed to the way I wanted it to be used.
Sure. I don't know if I do that with consciousness because internally I want to make sense of things for myself. And doing that requires being super clear about things. I don't need a dishonest interlocutor to mangle my words. I think that, we're limited to our own communication, and somebody can honestly, genuinely misunderstand what I said, or I could not have said it well.
Yeah.
Leading to a totally different conversation. And
which is how most of our conversations about this kind of thing go. One of us says something and the other's like, what?
Yeah, and then we go off and we're off to the races. But in this in particular, when it comes to consciousness, I think it's really, really important. So you were trying to say what you think consciousness is, and I don't.
You didn't want to grant awareness. Why not?
So awareness carries with it a lot of baggage for me. And those things would be sentience and agency.
Are those things necessary for consciousness?
I'm not sure. I think I could think about it and probably give you a good answer. On the fly, I really don't have one ready to go. But when you're talking about consciousness and agency, there needs to be an agent. And if your consciousness and your sense perception is already in the analogy, then that creates an analogy where there's an extra person there. And you're pointing to that extra person that is consciousness, that is aware of everything else. It implies agency when I think it should, I think I can get the idea, but because of the way you phrased it, I can't grant it because it carries with it too much other stuff that I just don't want to unpack.
Interesting.
That's why I think that's a bad analogy.
Okay. Well, we can revisit it. I do know that we have Wolfos on the line who wants to also weigh in on the fly fisherman analogy a little bit.
Okay.
So let's jump in and talk to Wolfos for a couple minutes. Hi, Wolfos.
Hey, guys.
Hey, what's your addition to the fly fisherman analogy?
Yeah.
The little addition I want to add to is between the fly fisherman and casting over the wall. I believe the consciousness is you're casting over the wall, correctly? And I believe the line that you're using is actually existential crisis that we're interpreting once we pull that idea back across the wall to ourselves.
Oh, that's a fun other use for it. I think I can really dig in on that, but I think that would be a separate conversation because I do think
Absolutely.
Yeah, because I do think that personal growth, usually comes through crisis. So I'm not against that. What do you think?
No, I think that that's a really interesting point. So it's not necessarily, as I was saying, the awareness of the action of fly fishing over the wall, so much as it is the emotional experience of compiling the information you're getting from the other side of the wall. Am I understanding that correctly?
Yeah, that's exactly how I was thinking about it.
Interesting.
So where I was thinking about it originally was this idea that when you see a thing, those photons can't get to your brain. They need to go through your eyes, and your eyes are going to send signals back to your brain that your brain is going to interpret. And because of that, your vision is actually the wall in between. It is what is between you and the outside world, and all that you can do is take in information and make the best sense of it that you can.
And it's that making the best sense of it part that is consciousness. Because anything can take in information based on, whatever that thing is equipped with.
I don't know about that. I think that taking in information is part of synthesizing that. I can take books and put them in a bag. Mm-hmm. That's not taking in information.
Right.
Taking in information would be synthesizing that, and I think that is at the heart of consciousness. It's the process of synthesis. Maybe I'll go with that temporarily.
I don't know how that's different than plants or computers, though, if it's just the process of synthesis. But we can dive into that. Wolfos, thank you so much for calling in.
Thank you.
I really like that addition.
Absolutely. I have a whole nother spiel on consciousness, but I want to call back Sunday so we can have that conversation.
Sounds good.
All right, you guys keep up the great work. Love you guys.
Thank you. Bye.
Take
Like you guys.
This is going to be a thing now.
Yep.
Oh, that's funny.
I'm in like with you.
That's awesome. Okay, so I think we're getting to the word with this conversation. I think we're dancing around it, and I think we need to just kind of address it.
We have to.
I think we do.
Okay, can we give just a couple more things first?
Okay.
So there are a couple of building blocks that people normally have when it comes to their definition of consciousness. And one of the first ones that people point to is Descartes. Rene Descartes, in trying to employ skepticism, ultimately in an effort to refute it, was radically skeptical about everything else in the world and landed at the very bottom as cogito ergo sum. I think, therefore I am. Mm-hmm. And that really has been a firm ground that most people agree on and are able to start at.
Okay.
Okay, you can do it.
I'm very intrigued by why you started with cogito ergo sum.
Because I think it's the Q word, isn't it?
It is the Q word. You are correct. Qualia. All right. So
what is qualia, V?
What is qualia, and is it an attribute of consciousness? So I'm curious what the chat thinks, and if anybody has definitions of qualia that they use or find useful, you can call in. There are like 6 actual definitions of qualia, by the way. Stanford Dictionary of Philosophy has like 6 different ones. And we talked about this briefly before. So there are multiple definitions. I'm not saying that the definition that I have is the right one, but I do have a definition. But before we go into that, what is qualia to your understanding, just in case someone doesn't know what that means?
I asked you first.
I have a thing to get into after this,
okay,
and it will
fine.
only make sense if people understand the concept.
Okay, can we push this lower third?
Oh, yes. There we go.
Oh, thank you. Okay, qualia. So qualia comes from Nagel. Nagel was he said what is the experience of being a bat, as an example.
What is it like to be a bat?
What is it like to be a bat? We can talk about how its brain processes things. We can talk about all of the different parts that go together to create that bat. But we are never going to understand the firsthand experience of being a bat because we are humans. And he defined that as qualia. Qualia is what a lot of people point to as evidence for an unseen magical realm. And in this magical realm, there exist things like qualia. And, often other people will put in things like, help me, the realm of numbers, the realm of Platonic.
Platonic idealism.
Platonic idealism, right? That there is this metaphysical place.
It's so interesting that you go there, because I have never heard that argument given.
I have, and I've heard it multiple times, and every time, So
there's definitely a definition of the six that might lend that credence.
You know who actually the first person to give me that argument was? My philosophy 101 professor in college.
Yeah, my philosophy 101 professor in college was great, but I do not want to think back on how he spun things, because it was a Christian college, and of course you could only do philosophy if it meant God.
We got into it because they were just like, well, qualia is evidence of the soul. And qualia is
so this is just trauma
of,
from a philosophy 101 class is what this is.
Honestly, I think that's a part to be, I'm not going to lie.
Is it different to experience the word qualia as Eric, who has that past, than it is for me to hear the word qualia? Is it different for me?
Yes.
Okay, that's qualia.
Okay.
It is different.
So let's define qualia then. Animal, mineral, or vegetable V?
No. Oh, it was so obtuse. I'm sorry. Here's the deal. Here's my definition of qualia. Are you ready for this?
Hit me. I've been waiting.
Okay, I teased him about this last night. So my definition is the subjective experience of my consciousness processing data using my brain and interpreting it using my history and neurochemistry. For example, it is very exclusively like something for V to hear the song Moon River. Other people might have very similar feelings about the song. They might hate it. They might not even know what that song is. But taking everyone who would experience the same kind of sad, longing, beautiful emotions of just Hyoreth about this song, it is still unique to hear that song as me, because not only do I have my own unique neurochemistry and that, but also the fact that when I was a little kid, tiny little V got sung Moon River to by their dad, who made up words for all the names of their stuffed animals to be in place of other words. And then that was the very first song that V listened to after hearing that their dad had killed himself. So my experience, based on my history and the way my brain processes information, is unique when I hear that song. And that is what it is like to be V listening to Moon River. There's nothing supernatural about it. There's nothing outside of my own brain and experiences. But it would be dishonest of me to say that anybody else in the entire world could experience exactly what I do when listening to Moon River.
Okay. So that's beautiful. And the fact that you use that as an analogy means that I need to step on something beautiful that you just said.
It is an appeal to emotion.
I don't like it. That was very beautiful. Now,
I'm very curious for you to put holes in this.
Sure. So where I'm going to go with this is...
Can we move the stuff so I can see the live chat?
Absolutely. By the way, this is gin and lime juice, so I can just keep re-upping my gin and tonic. So I'm going to talk about my depression.
Okay.
I have clinical depression. Mm-hmm. It is not because things are bad in my life. It's because my brain is very stingy when it comes to the happy chemicals. That's just a fact about Eric. Mm-hmm. I didn't invent depression. And I don't think that I'm so special that someone else's experience of depression is so unique as to be functionally unique or perfectly unique. I think that
But you're putting words in there that I'm not using, though.
Well, I know, but I'm putting them in there because I want to chip away at what's important for me to chip away at. So when you say your experience of listening to Moon River is unique, mm-hmm. Do you think that anyone else before, in the past, currently, or in the future, could ever have a similar enough history, background, whatever, to elicit the same response in them that Moon River does for you?
I'm confused by what you mean by enough. Enough to what?
Enough to warrant being called the same.
No.
Okay. So if you're going to be that particular,
Yeah.
then okay, I'll grant that.
Yeah, that's all I mean by it. When I say qualia, what I mean is the way my consciousness interprets information using my brain with its unique neurochemistry combined with my unique past experiences.
Okay.
That renders it functionally not possible to replicate unless I became a clone with all the same memories, in which case we could have that conversation about whether or not that is me.
Oh, can we do a teleporter problem?
Absolutely.
Episode?
We'll dress up like Star Trek characters and we'll do a teleporter problem episode. 100%.
Yes. Okay.
But that is how I define qualia. I'm not saying that there's some kind of shocking, unique thing about it that is somehow divorced from every other experience. I'm saying that there is something unique about my perception of the world based on a confluence of physical events and processes that I alone experience.
Okay. So that can be true of every sense, data, impulse that's received by the brain to a degree. Mm-hmm. Okay. So let's use this functionally. Mm-hmm. If you were talking to an atheist and you said you believe qualia exists, what do you think that you would be communicating to them? What would they take away from that statement?
Interesting. So I guess my question back to you is, why are we bringing in a third party and putting this in a different context?
Sure, because I think that that's a really unique functional definition. And when I stumble across a definition that I'm considering using myself, mm-hmm. I start hammering away at it as hard as possible to see if it stands up. Mm-hmm. That is, you know me, you know, living with me, being my life partner, you see me do this all of the time. People on the other side of the camera, you guys don't get to see that. But when I
get the sense that they probably could guess.
When I come across something like that, I absolutely take to it with everything I got to see if it can be broken down. And if it can't, I feel much more comfortable in using it because I know that I've kind of covered my bases. So when we're talking about definitions of things, mm-hmm. Number one, it's really, really good to have a solid concept. Number two, it's really good to make sure that what you're saying, what you're communicating, is lending itself to a useful dialogue with your interlocutor.
Interesting. You do philosophy to be useful?
Absolutely. That's that's why we start with defining our terms with every new caller, because what they might call God could be, something entirely different. What they call consciousness, all of those things are so vastly different and carry so much baggage that we just assume the other person has in their head.
Oh, no,
that we talk past each other.
No, I agree. I'm just saying when I do philosophy and come up with ways to frame the world, it's not to convince a random hypothetical apologist. It's to give myself pleasure. It's what's the word for it? It's hedonism in its most basic sense. Epicurean hedonism. That's what I do philosophy for.
I'm not disincluding that, but I'm also not looking for reasons to accept a definition. I'm looking for reasons to reject the definition because I want that definition to stand up to scrutiny. And I scrutinize myself all the time. If I have a bad reason to believe a thing and I recognize that, I'm going to disassemble my understanding and build it back up stronger. So when we're talking about qualia, qualia is a loaded word.
Yeah.
I think that if I said I accept qualia, and what I was doing is communicating to a lot of people who understand qualia to mean the existence of a soul, then I'm going to need to either make sure that I'm individually having a conversation with every single person who hears it so that they understand that my definition isn't their definition.
You know how you do that?
But if it's that useful,
You publish a book.
if it's
Seriously, no.
no.
Here's the deal.
Then you become Jordan Peterson.
No, you become Daniel Dennett. That's the difference. So here's the deal. When I talk about things like qualia, I guess I'm just framing it differently. I don't do debates, like actual live debates. I won't, probably, ever. I don't enjoy them. And I think that they're functionally useless because of exactly what you just said.
But this is a problem you're going to deal with me as your partner and not on a stage.
Right.
And you're going to deal with it with every person you talk to.
No, because every person I talk to is going to be having this conversation with me one-on-one, not rapid fire using terms to impress your side of an audience like a sporting event. No shade. My point is,
Oh, shade.
when I want to dive into this, I'm doing it in the same way that it sounds pretentious. I'm doing it in the same way that people like Harrison Dennett talk about free will. Okay, we understand that libertarian free will doesn't exist. When I say I believe that free will exists, people are going to assume it's libertarian free will until people use other definitions often enough that it no longer becomes the default.
Yeah, so you got to have a really damn good reason to say you believe in free will. You got to have a really good definition that's worth fighting and changing the general zeitgeist around. So
is the question less how would you use this functionally in a conversation and why care about the definition of this term at all?
Say that again.
So it sounds like the deeper question that you're asking me is why put effort into defining this term in a way that is not the standard accepted definition? That is not useful. Is that the feedback I'm getting correctly?
Close.
Okay.
The feedback that you're getting is, V, I think you understand all of the things that we just said. And if you are still saying that you accept qualia, and you are understanding that that's going to be a hill to die on with every conversation you have, then you must have a good reason for it. There needs to be something that you're communicating therein that's worth doing that for. And so
how would you define your subjective experience as an individual that is unique from how other people experience the world in whatever capacity? 2% different,
Sure.
2% unique. To me, that concept, what it is like to be a bat, makes sense. I'm waiting to be disproven on this. I would be happy to change my mind. That is compelling to me. And to say I don't accept it or to avoid the term because it's misused by other people sounds dishonest to me. I do think that qualia is a thing. I think it's a unique experience to be me in the world. Not completely and intrinsically unique, but unique functionally because of the things I listed, my own brain and my own experiences.
You're special. Now tell me how that conversation is going to be used. Like, Okay, I know you're special. I love the hell out of you. We're gonna get married. Um, you don't need to convince me that you're special, but you also don't need to sell me on qualia to get that about you. I think if I were to say my unique experience is enough, I still don't understand why qualia is being used because it carries so much baggage.
Because I think
And it's very pragmatic.
it is. It's so weirdly pragmatic for you.
Well, because you gave a definition, I understand it, and now we're deciding whether or not that's a useful definition, right? I mean, you gave the ideals. You don't need to explain qualia more to me. You know, now we're determining whether or not that's a useful definition.
Well, we can definitely keep going down this road, but that is a different conversation.
And it's where we land every single time we talk about consciousness.
Well, because here's the thing. I'm not going to go up to people and be like, qualia exists. I'm not going to do sandwich board outside, you know, megaphone person and be like, you know, qualia is real, right? That's not my point. But if somebody, regardless of how they are going to interpret it, asks me, what do you think about Nagel? Is it like something to be a bat? Is it different intrinsically than what it is like to be a human? I'd be like, yes. Is it so qualia?
Okay.
Yes. And here is how I define qualia.
So-
I would honestly answer.
Sure. So can I maybe have some fun here?
Sure, go for it. I love
So-
fun.
So I'm going to be
That's the most intense, like,
an honest interlocutor.
I love fun.
I want to play. I want to play with this idea.
Okay.
Okay. So V, if we're talking about all of the processes around consciousness, if we're talking about what consciousness is, and you bring up qualia,
Yeah.
is qualia part of consciousness?
That is the question that we're trying to get at. And I would say that it doesn't have to be, but I would associate it with consciousness for me personally.
Okay. And for people at home who want to do a little more homework, look up Chalmers. Chalmers.
Philosophical zombies.
Yeah, you have no idea if the people around you have qualia. If they're experiencing the world around them, they could just be meat robots, and you could be the only one who's actually experiencing things.
I think Jay from Florida also had Chalmers on the brain.
Do we want to talk to Jay real quick?
Let's talk to
Okay.
Jay real quick because this ties in perfectly with Jay's question.
Sure. Hey, Jay.
Hey. Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
I think you guys just mentioned what I was asking because I was like,
Down a bit.
I loved B's explanation of qualia. It did make sense to me, but then I was like, how do I know if that experience is unique, or how do I quantify the experience if the only thing I have access to is my own? I'm like,
It's unfalsifiable.
yeah,
Yeah, doesn't it suck?
yeah, it does. Oh, by the way, V, I follow you on Twitter. I mentioned you a couple times.
Nice.
We talk about Star Trek things. This topic brought a Star Trek episode to mind, which is more recently in Discovery, where the ship actually expressed consciousness, and I really liked how they
Yes.
handled consciousness. Yes,
Mm-hmm. Zora.
I really love that area.
Yeah.
Zora. I love Zora. But on the question of that, I'm not sure how you would handle that, or how you would quantify that on your side.
Absolutely. That's a really good question, Jay. Thank you for calling in.
Definitely. Thank you for calling.
Yeah.
Tumbrils and Drumbeat says, isn't that just gussied up solipsism?
Yeah, it is. No, it's not even gussied up. That is just straight up solipsism. It's brain in a vat without the materialistic element taken out of it. It's materialism in a vat.
Okay.
Yeah, so essentially it's the same. That's why it's not compelling to me. Thank you, Tumbrils. That's a really good backtrack. The reason that it's not compelling to me, the philosophical zombie idea, the idea that everyone else could be existing without consciousness and you might be the only one, and how would you know? To me sounds like, well, you could be a brain in a vat, and you might be the only person in the universe, and how would you know? It's unfalsifiable, sure, but it's such an like, there's so many things that you would need to grant to get there that it destroys Occam's razor, right?
I agreed. So I think what that does is it serves to underscore what the limitations of that term and what the limitations of that concept are. And so if, like, again, I'm bringing baggage to the table, and the baggage that I'm bringing is talking to a lot of apologists, a lot of religious folk who point to qualia and go, qualia exists. Qualia is non-physical.
Yeah.
And in the great Venn diagram that is consciousness, you have that which is physical and that which is non-physical. Qualia remains in the non-physical, and
Not based on my interpretation.
And but I'm giving this because I know people are watching who haven't had this conversation. They would define the non-physical as the definition of the soul, or
Well, yeah, they do the same thing
proof
with consciousness
soul.
and the mind and emotions and love. And we're not grand. We're not saying we
And I'm
can't-
willing to die on the hill of all those others. I'm not willing to die on the hill of qualia because I don't think it rises to the bar of me wanting to defend it.
You don't think that qualia is as important as an emotion like love? Why not? What makes one of those more important than the other?
Sure. So is qualia an emotion?
Emotion can be part of qualia for sure.
That's not. Is qualia itself an emotion?
No.
Okay. Is, like, qualia is a descriptor of things. And because it's a descriptor of things, you could describe what it's like to be in love. And saying, my love for this person is the strongest that's ever existed in the world. And my unique personal experience of this love is so strong that, there will never be any like it ever before or ever since,
So Shakespeare
Sure.
essentially, yeah.
Yeah. I think that you can say those things, but I think that even if you didn't, I think love is more important. I think emotions are more important. You're talking about a descriptor, and I don't know if that descriptor is useful enough for me to rise to the occasion.
Okay, so here's an argument. Qualia is a good, here, how about this? We have conversations between us with callers about veganism.
Sure.
I'm going there. If we believed that qualia existed, would that impact feeling comfortable eating things that experienced a unique what it is like to be that animal?
Hold on. So you used the words qualia and existence. And how can qualia exist? Does it exist as a concept? Does it exist as a tangible
It exists as a
thing?
cake, Eric. It exists as a cake.
Well, and for people who understand that, perfect. But that didn't communicate to me anything but saying that the cake is a lie. I'm so
Consciousness-
sorry, everyone. I'm so sorry.
Consciousness is baking, qualia is the cake. You can say, well, a cake is just eggs and flour and the process of baking. I don't understand why you would call it a cake. It's just a bunch of different ingredients
Right.
put through a process.
Perfect. Cake exists physically. I can touch cake, and obviously then qualia exists physically, just like a cake, right?
Oh, why?
Because I'm pointing out where that analogy is dripping. And I think that there's enough use of qualia in that not good way that I'm still not convinced.
No, but you're not answering my question,
What's
which
the
is
question?
leaving aside whether or not it exists in the physical world, which is apparently the only kind of existence you grant things.
So
Then-
it's the only type of existence that I will leave unchallenged. If someone wants to say that concept exists,
that's a good caveat. I like that. If you believed that it was uniquely like cow number 543 to be cow 100 or 543, would you feel more or less comfortable eating cow number 543? Or would it factor in at all?
no, it doesn't factor in.
Doesn't factor in?
No.
Interesting.
So here's the thing. I think that anything with a spinal cord or with rudimentary ability to take in sense data and build a model of, the world around them to the best of their ability is to some degree conscious.
Right.
But I also will not grant that all living things are conscious. If I say V is unconscious, no one's going to point out, well, what about V's gut bacteria? They're still working away. No, V's unconscious.
We disagree on that too.
Really? So
Yeah.
an unconscious person is conscious?
Yes. On
Okay,
the
what?
philosophical level that we are discussing, yes, fully. That person is using their neurocortical system to process information that is being stored in their brain from taking in that information later. It's not instantaneous, and you're not reacting in real time to that information. But dreams and unconscious thought are still your brain reacting to sense data.
Okay, so I'm not talking about dreaming because I'll agree with you on dreaming. I'm talking about general anesthesia. I'm talking about you are out and 5 minutes, 5 hours, or 5 days could have passed. But when you arrive back at, we didn't talk about personal narrative, did we?
Personal narrative?
Yeah.
Apparently not, because I'm confused.
So when you fall asleep at night saying you don't dream, just for the sake of this argument, right? You have a break in your narrative.
This is going to tie into the transporter problem. I
is.
don't necessarily see this as tying into consciousness, though.
So then all I'm going to say about it is, you're absolutely right. Then all I'm going to say about it is that the break in your personal narrative about yourself, about what's going on in your life, there's a stop. When the lights are out, you are not conscious. That is how I first understood consciousness. That is unconscious. That is what people mean when they say unconscious, that you are not taking in information. You are out. The lights are out. Nobody's home. That means you're unconscious.
See, and I would argue with that.
Got it. What unique personal experience does a person have when they're unconscious? It doesn't even have qualia. Like, there's nothing to being unconscious other than the fact that the lights are out.
Just as stubborn and practical as you are here.
Good.
There's a
I'm
difference
2 gin and tonics
between,
in. Hit me. Let's do this.
There's a difference between being unconscious and being not conscious.
Okay.
Ha. So there. There are definitely...
As long as you point out the difference, I'm fine with that.
Yeah. So you can be unconscious and still be a conscious being.
So can we be even more pedantic?
Sure, go for it.
Sure. So you can be unconscious and be capable of consciousness. You can be capable of becoming conscious. You can be capable of experiencing consciousness. Just because you are not right now, maybe you're getting a tooth pulled.
Here is where I would have wanted somebody with some kind of neuroscience degree, because I'm not willing to grant one way or the other that your brain is not actively processing data, even if you don't remember it waking up.
So
I don't know enough about how the brain works to do that.
I mean, I don't think you need to. Let's take a second. You have a lot of systems in your body that don't require your conscious effort. You are not actively beating your heart. So does having a beating heart indicate consciousness?
No.
Okay. Does the existence of gut bacteria indicate consciousness?
Not consciousness as we would describe it, but I guarantee you there are whole cultures.
Okay, that was a good one. That was really good. I like that. Okay.
That was a good one. Okay. Patting myself on the back for that one. Okay. So the thing is, where are we going with this? Let's take a call.
Sure.
and get someone,
okay.
because I feel like we're kind of going all over the place here.
Well, I can bring us back on track, but if we want to take a call, we can do that afterward.
Sure. Bring us back on track after we talk to D in Texas.
D.
Hello.
Hey.
Hi. What's your thought?
Okay, you kind of brushed on it earlier, but is your five senses necessary to be conscious?
Ooh,
If
no.
if a surgeon went in and cut off all of your five senses, you would say that you'd still be conscious.
Yes.
So here's where it gets into horror.
Because there are situations where that is the case. You can be in a
Yeah.
coma and also still be aware that you are in a coma, even though your body is not currently taking in new information.
Right, and ultimately that's it, is if you have built a model, you know, it's the fact that you are building kind of a functional understanding of the world around you. That understanding is how I would define consciousness. And so if a doctor cut all of those things off, V, you said it perfectly, you know, very succinctly. Just because it's not receiving new information doesn't mean that you haven't built a model. You know, there can be other things.
The active new information is not necessary for consciousness.
I don't
It's just
think so.
previous experiences of information.
Yeah, I mean,
That's a good clarification.
Yeah, I mean, just imagine it this way. Just imagine that you were born without your five senses, but you have something like, you know, your sense of time and your proprioception. And so the only things that really exist are feeling off balance, not understanding why, and understanding that time is passing. I think that's a terrifying existence.
So you think
but I think that
active
there's consciousness there.
thoughts are an important part of consciousness?
So I think that thoughts are probably, in this example, I think that thoughts would be the individual chunks of data that are being processed. And so let's say you are taking in visual data. You know, I think you can have a thought about that. You're applying that data, and V looks like they're about to explode.
But if you don't have any five senses, you're not taking in visual data, though.
Right, and so, but you would still have your sense of time. You'd still have your sense of balance. You'd still have.
Although the kinds of thoughts you could think would be severely limited, at least if we understand thoughts correctly in terms of we'd need words first.
Yeah, and I mean, this has been studied with people who are deaf, that instead of hearing, you know, having an inner monologue that they can hear, they will actually kind of see hands making the symbols. Like those concepts still need to.
Yeah, you can dream in sign.
Shape. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. D, I have such, okay, I'm very, very curious to see where this next question goes, and it's inspired by your question. So thank you very much for calling in.
Yeah, thank you for calling.
Oh, no problem. I really like you guys.
Aw, we like you too.
All right. So here's
Okay,
my
hit me.
question.
What's up?
If you are not willing to grant qualia because it is useless because you cannot prove that it exists or that other people experience it, why would you grant thoughts? Because you cannot prove that other people are thinking.
Sure.
Why is it more useful to grant thoughts than qualia?
Absolutely. Because this definition is the same as sticking you in a CAT scan and watching your brain light up upon receiving sense data and go, that is a thought.
Wait, how are you defining thought?
That's what I thought I just told D. It's that discrete action of taking in information and then synthesizing that information.
The synthesizing part is different, though. You can see people taking in information and reacting to it, but synthesizing it happens off of the MRI.
Does
I
it?
believe. Like, I don't know.
So honestly, this could be, you know, number one, this is 80% me talking out of my ass. I don't know how much you're talking out of your ass, but I'm trying to understand the world the best that I can.
Yeah.
If this is grounded in a fundamental misunderstanding of neuroscience,
Which it probably is, frankly.
please correct me.
Yeah.
I want to know.
Absolutely. My point here is if we are going to hold some elements of consciousness as unfalsifiable, if we are even going to say that, like, we can't pick and choose. We have to either say consciousness itself is unfalsifiable, therefore it's not useful to talk about, or we would have to say, even though consciousness is technically unfalsifiable, we should still talk about it. Which is the final question, actually, that I would love to put up here, which is, should this be a bigger or smaller issue? Should we be talking about this in the first place? Is there a use for this conversation, especially if so many of the different components that we've pinpointed as being integral or necessary or part of consciousness are unfalsifiable from the outside?
So I have a good answer to that, but question for you, V, just as far as structure is going.
Yeah.
I would love to do a shout out, but I don't know if it would be better if I
Please
gave
do a
my
shout out.
response first.
Absolutely.
Okay, cool. So, hey everybody. We started this show an hour and 15 minutes ago. The reason we started this show is because we want to give you insight into how we discuss things in our day-to-day. This is the kind of stuff that we talk about while we're making dinner or that we're on our way to an appointment or something like that. This is just it, and we thought people would really enjoy it. We
Also,
argue, we get heated, and we dive into things really, really hard, and we maintain respect and love and care, and I think it would be good to model.
No, exactly. If you're curious about the kinds of conversations we want to have on this show, if you're a caller who has called in before, it's this, right? This is the kind of dialogue that we want. Yes, it can get a little bit heated. We can talk over each other. We can be like, no, that's stupid.
Yeah.
But it's always done in a respectful way, and it's done in a way that grants the other person the autonomy to prove their point and the trust to do that effectively.
Absolutely. And in fact, the trust that I have in you, V, is such that if you were to raise your voice and get really angry and heated, there's no part of me that identifies that as you being angry at me as much as you being fucking fired up on the topic.
Just so excited about this idea.
But we decided we wanted to include you in this because we're fundraising. And what we're going to do is we're going to take all of the funds, all of the AdSense that comes in for this video and all of the super chats that come in, and we're going to be putting that towards one of our two goals for this year. Goal number one is an editing PC. We want to get an editing PC that we can use specifically for this show. We are limited in what we can do, and I don't know how much I want to give away, but suffice it to say that we don't have the horsepower to do that. Pricing that out, it's going to cost about $5,000. And we're willing to take the time and save and fundraise to do that. So if you're liking this, awesome. If you're watching an ad, thank you, because you don't need to donate. We just want you to know this is what we're doing right now. We've raised $82.
Yay!
And that's $82. That's, we're $82 closer to that editing computer. And we're really, really excited about it. Once we do that, we're going to move on to our second goal, which is, so we have amazing people who are moderating our live chat, who are screening calls, who are aiding on social media in keeping things safe, and having a healthy, safe environment for people to engage with each other and on Discord, Facebook, in the YouTube live chat. Mm-hmm. That's the limit of our help. That's the limit of the help that we receive. When it comes to doing the show, when it comes to scheduling this, when it comes to the actual running the programming, Fee is sitting behind the board right now and is monitoring it. We have screens up so that we can watch everything. We are hosting and we're producing at the same time. And that sucks. We're not able to focus on topics as much as we would wish, because we have to split our attention.
That gin's coming up to bite you.
No, it's the tonic. Getting my dose of quinine.
Oh my gosh.
Sorry about that. But anyway, I just wanted to say, if you're watching this, you're enjoying this, awesome. Thank you. Leave a thumbs up. Leave a comment. Tell us what you think. Tell us where we're wrong. If you haven't subscribed, please subscribe, hit the notification bell. All of those things help to get us out there. And we're going to be putting this as much as we can towards those goals this year.
Absolutely.
Okay, so your question, do you want to restate it and we can dive in?
Sure. My question is, and this is probably going to close us out because this is going to be a big, meaty subject, is why talk about consciousness at all, especially if, based on the last hour and 15 minutes, we have determined that certain aspects of consciousness, whether we give them the words qualia or not, or thoughts or not, are ultimately unfalsifiable outside of your own head, why talk about consciousness at all?
Sure. Qualia is unfalsifiable. Consciousness is not. And I think making that distinction will help.
Well, based on the definitions that we've worked with so far, I don't see that as being the case. I'm not willing to grant that it's falsifiable.
So when it comes to this, the way we would test it, because we can test whether or not a person's conscious. Doctors do it all the time to determine whether or not someone's in a coma. We have working functional definitions of consciousness.
It's different than unconscious. That's the point. So we can test if someone's unconscious. Sure. We can't. I'm curious how you would test if something wasn't conscious. That's where that distinction comes in.
Well, then,
if we grant that something is conscious and then they are no longer responding to external stimuli, we can assume they are unconscious.
Sure.
At that point.
So when you say not conscious,
Yeah.
could I say not capable of consciousness?
Sure. Absolutely. Let's go with that.
Are those interchangeable?
For the purposes of this, sure.
Cool. Okay. So I have a rudimentary understanding of what is involved in consciousness.
Which is
owning a brain that is functioning and taking in sense data and processing that to build a model of the world around me, to build an understanding of what's around me so I can make informed decisions. I think that the way I would test that would be sticking someone in an MRI, not MRI, CAT scan, the one that you can see activity in the brain. My brain's not obviously working that well right now. I blame the gin. But first thing I would do is I would see if their brain is lighting up and showing that sense data is being received and then is being checked against other parts of the brain. Those other parts of the brain are being used to contextualize that sense data, and contextualizing that sense data, I think, is a core part of consciousness. And so,
but that's the thing.
So
that's
not having that, if I were to stick somebody in that same scan and prick them with a needle,
and nothing happened,
then I would say that it's likely that person, that body, is not capable of consciousness.
Okay, but here's the thing. Based on your explanation there, a computer is conscious.
fMRI. Thank you, fMRI. Thank you, live chat.
A computer is conscious then. Because you input information, you can tell what parts light up, where it's going, what other parts are reacting to it. Therefore, it's conscious.
I don't think so. I want to live in a world where computers are conscious.
I don't. But here's the...
But I don't think they are yet. And
where is the disconnect there? Because everything you just described is a computer. We can do the same things with a computer.
Sure. So... I think that there's a degree of, oh my gosh, you're challenging me in a way that is making me uncomfortable, and I really enjoy that. Because...
Eureka.
Well, the thing that's making me uncomfortable is what I want to point towards, is I want to say that... oh, help me here. It's not autonomy.
Awareness?
Not quite, but it's one's ability to make decisions on one's own volition.
Free will?
Not free will. I'm sure the live chat will get in there, but let's just say autonomy for now. I don't think that computers are capable of autonomous decision making.
And you think humans are?
No, and that's why I'm uncomfortable.
Interesting.
Yeah.
So consciousness doesn't exist.
Oh.
Did we get there? Are we coming away with this saying that?
Well, I mean, so that is a fatalistic view that I've definitely been, generally understanding of, and I just try not to look at it. But I feel like we've spent all of this time exploring my views of consciousness.
Well, see, that is where qualia comes into play. Because if we are exploring this concept of consciousness as the input and synthesis of external data and also a degree of autonomy, wait, no one has consciousness because we don't believe that the human brain has that level of autonomy either. So we would need something else. Can't be autonomy to differentiate between humans and conscious things with actual natural biological brains and computers. The concept of qualia becomes valuable because it becomes a thing that you can point to as these things experience what it is like to be them, and these things don't.
And I think that if we're using that as a test, then I would phrase that as, give me a second. What it is to be a thing. I understand the concept. I understand where you're going with it, and I especially understand your definition. Mm-hmm. So how am I going to butt up against it? What am I going to do to attack that idea to see if it stands? Mm-hmm. Well, we already talked about its usefulness in conversations with other people, but right now you're talking about determining whether or not a thing is conscious versus not capable of consciousness, right? Mm-hmm. I feel like we can do better.
Okay, I'm totally willing to do better.
I think that we're pointing to the result and determining the result, and I think there's a process involved. And here we go.
Okay.
So why do we bring in sense data? Why, what led to the emergence of consciousness?
Evolution.
Okay. Why is it evolutionarily beneficial to be conscious?
To better survive. Except I in my head, I swapped that out with perceived sense data. So forgive me.
No
I
worries.
don't think there is a benefit to being conscious, at least at the level that humans are. I think it's a fluke. I think it's
agree.
a massive fluke. It's
Yep.
a mistake.
Yep.
We shouldn't have been.
Okay. Okay. Not that we shouldn't have been, but it in and of itself is not, like, we did not develop.
It's an accident.
Yeah, it's an emergent property.
Yeah.
Okay. If we look at a computer, like a current computer, like the computer that we're working on now.
Yeah.
It's a tool. And I don't see like an understanding, a model being built that computer is using to understand the world around it. Like, there's not a...
That's what AI is.
That's what AI wants to be.
No, it is. Like, that's the thing. You can program an AI to perceive things that you did not input through gathering data and drawing conclusions.
Well, then I guess I'm going to say that we're a lot closer to technological consciousness than I realized. I mean, if I'm willing to grant that a rat has rudimentary consciousness,
Yeah.
then I think in sufficiently advanced AI, sure, I'll grant that.
That is mind-blowing to me that you would rather grant that a computer has consciousness than grant that qualia is a useful way to determine whether or not something is conscious.
No, yeah, because I don't agree with it. It's not a willingness thing. It's not a stubbornness thing. It is I fundamentally don't think that we are so special that that's the test.
Why are you using... I'm not saying humans uniquely have qualia. I'm not saying I am special. If anything, I am uniquely ununique in the way that I exist, because everything that is conscious has the experience of what it is like to be that conscious being.
We assume.
Right.
Yeah.
Just like we assume that
Going back to
consciousness is
Chalmers.
a thing.
I don't think so. I think that consciousness is what we call the collection of receiving that sensory data. I think that
And you don't think that there is any validity to talking about the experience of receiving that sensory data.
I think that there's validity, especially in the definition that you gave.
Yeah.
We should find another word for it.
Jesus Christ. Can we... Okay.
So anytime that it's being used and pointed to as a thing that exists, we need to be super clear in understanding what they mean by exists. Because is qualia tangible?
No.
Okay.
It is the culmination of
Can you measure
process.
qualia?
You're using the same language to describe emergent properties. It's an emergent property, Eric.
Okay, but can you measure elements of consciousness?
No.
Yes. Yes. The whole fMRI example was exactly my response to that.
Okay, so we are definitely defining consciousness as different. You are saying that functionally computers are conscious and we are not, because there is nothing beyond just the, like, you're not granting the experience component.
We can observe those things happening.
Right. So
that's the granting of consciousness. I don't need to be in a brain dead person's head and understand what it is to be brain dead to go, that person's brain dead. I don't need to, be unconscious.
But you would
or
take
experience
that
unconsciousness to determine whether or not someone else is unconscious.
No, you totally would. If there were two people in a coma and you knew that there was an experience, what it is like to be that person, you would want to know, are they experiencing that thing? Because that's going to determine whether or not I put on nice music or pull the fucking plug.
Not necessarily, no. That's an assumption I'm not going to grant, because it is never going to be possible for you to understand the experience of that person. And because of that, it's unfalsifiable. What if experiencing that person, being that person, was the most horrifying thing ever and the most gracious thing you could do is pull the plug? What if, you're assuming that person is having a happy existence? I'm not willing to grant that even if it was possible, that the conclusion that you just gave is going to arise naturally from it.
No, my point here is that you are completely ignoring the experiential component of consciousness. You are saying functionally it does not exist. Therefore, we are as conscious as computers are. If a rat is conscious, AI is conscious.
I'm tentative on that. I still got to think about it. I'm sure that there are glaring things that I'm not thinking about, but I don't think that that's me being... So someone in the live chat said, V is right. Bill Pasto in the chat says, V is right, Eric is stubborn. I don't know what I'm being stubborn about.
You're being stubborn because you're refusing to use the word qualia in the context we've already defined qualia because you don't like the word.
So
we've agreed for the purposes of this conversation, we're defining it in a way, and you're like, okay, I agree with that.
Yeah,
and I'm willing to grant
I'll take that. Now, where's it useful?
In determining who is conscious and what is an AI.
So do you think that, let's say we take V and move V 200 years into the future, and there are AIs that are widely regarded as conscious? I think that is a future that is not impossible. Mm-hmm. And that AI explains to you what it is like to be that AI, that there is a unique experience in being that AI. Would you then say that is conscious?
Conscious, yes.
Would you say that it is qualia?
Possibly, depending on how it was built. Because if you remember, my definition of qualia had two components. Experience, subjective experience, interpreted through past experiences, which an AI walking around would have and be able to interpret through, and neurochemistry. And if all AI were built exactly the same, maybe it wouldn't be. Maybe there would be a little bit more wiggle room there. If we came up with like a biological way to create AI and each one was unique in the same way humans were, yeah, I would say that AI had qualia.
I see. I understand the usefulness and the necessity for us to have brain chemistry, but I'm not convinced that it's a necessary component. I see where you're going. I just don't have the same assumption.
Necessary component of what?
Of qualia. That brain chemistry is
well, you brought it up yourself. You said, I have depression. My brain does not produce the appropriate amount of happy chemicals. Mm-hmm. That's going to directly impact how Eric perceives the world.
Yes.
If someone had exactly the same experiences as you did growing up until this moment, and also didn't have depression, that person's experience of the world would be not your experience.
Agreed.
So your brain chemistry impacts how you interpret things.
Yeah, I'm granting that.
Yeah.
Where I'm pushing back is the other side of it. I'm saying that, let's say we have a person who, is experiencing all of these things, but does not have the brain chemistry. Does that mean that they are not, that there is no qualia there, or that it's just different? Because if it's different, cool, I agree. But if you're saying that there is no qualia, then that's where I'm confused. So I'm not saying that a computer, some future consciousness, would have the same kind of qualia as us. But if you're using it to determine the difference between computers being conscious or, humans being conscious.
If qualia is an emergent property of consciousness and subjective experience, then yes, AI would have qualia.
Okay.
Right now, the way I'm defining it is based on a world that doesn't have futuristic Westworld AI people.
Okay, but then the test you're giving is not a great one.
Which test?
The test of, is a thing consciousness, does it have qualia? Is a thing conscious, does it have qualia? That was the test that you were applying, is how do we know that you called me stubborn because I was willing to grant the AI thing
well, technically,
and rats
if we want to be correct,
instead of pushing back, instead of accepting
the live
that
chat
qualia,
called you stubborn. Let's just make sure we're clear on this.
So you brought that point up, and I'm bringing it back home to roost here. You're willing to grant then, you just said the usefulness of qualia is in determining whether or not the thing is conscious. And
right.
I just painted a scenario that is reasonable enough to show and illustrate that the test you just gave is not a good test.
Well, it would have to grow and adapt in the same way that all understanding of everything grows and adapts in the light of new technology.
Okay, so at what point do we allow that? I think that if we're going to use that as a valid test, then we should start doing that as soon as we start doing the test. It's not like, okay, everyone's going to fail this test up until we decide that it's possible for people to start succeeding. That's not how tests work. It's a test. So you need to grant that qualia could be possible today if you're willing to grant that it could be possible in the future. And if that's the case, then your test of qualia for consciousness is a bad one.
I'm lost. I'm sorry. Let me backtrack and maybe make this a little bit broader. I was trying to be narrower in my focus, but if you want to apply it to Westworld hosts, we can broaden it.
If you haven't seen Westworld, watch Westworld, you guys.
Qualia is if you haven't watched Westworld and you're watching this,
go watch Westworld.
Go watch Westworld.
At least the first, 2 seasons, 3 seasons?
At least the first 2 seasons.
Yeah.
Okay, here's the deal. I would define qualia as subjective experience as interpreted through past history and unique brain function.
Subjective experience.
Interpreted through past history and unique brain function.
Okay. So does a newborn baby have qualia?
That's a really good question. Probably, but probably not very much.
Okay.
There might be degrees of qualia.
Okay. So let's again use that definition and see if that's a useful definition. Where are you going to use that definition? And how is that a useful enough definition for you to die on this hill?
Because otherwise the answer, for 2 reasons. It's useful in 2 ways. The first way, it explains to me what is happening that I have a subjective experience.
I mean, you're saying you have a subjective experience is granted and accepted.
Right.
Congratulations. You don't need qualia to do that.
That is qualia. Qualia.
That's how you're defining it. But
no,
again,
in every definition, what it is like to be V, my subjective experience, is qualia. I'm going the extra mile and trying to explain why I have a subjective experience.
That's like saying, this is a car except for the steering wheel and the tires. This is still a car. I'm just not going to talk about these parts, right? The piece that gets brought in is there's more to that definition. When people are talking about qualia, they talk about the non-material element of consciousness.
The emergent property of being conscious.
And because those things get conflated, it turns into a nightmare.
Okay,
and I hate it.
But I know you do.
And so if
but
you're
that's
not going,
what's happening here.
No, but it is what's going to happen until either there's an out and then I'm going to accept it, or it's not going to pass my own rigor in whether or not to accept that definition because it doesn't meet muster. It doesn't
meet muster because other people misuse it or use a different definition for it?
It doesn't meet muster in that if I'm not able to understand and get behind the definition of a word fully, I'm not going to use it.
But you did get behind the definition of this word.
So that we could test it. And I'm testing it, and I'm bringing up where it fails the test.
Subjective experience based on the interpretation of past history and unique brain function.
Okay.
Doesn't even have to be a fucking biological brain.
Okay.
Unique brain function. That is qualia.
Okay. Is it immaterial?
It's a process.
That is the correct answer. That's the correct answer. But people are watching this. So yeah, there are people who are going to watch this. I want to make sure that we're super, super fucking clear. We're having this conversation with each other, but there's a third party here.
It's a process. It's
so
an
is it material or immaterial?
Property. Is consciousness material or immaterial?
Ah, yes. It is where the soul resides. That is a good question.
Eric,
what you need to do is tap into the
I'm arguing with two different people here. I'm debating with Eric half the time, and then half the time when Eric doesn't have an answer, then this other dishonest apologist comes in and tries to get me into a corner. It's very frustrating.
Well, then let me clarify. Mm-hmm. When the apologist comes out, it's because Eric is really close to agreeing with you.
Okay.
And no longer has a spot, and so now is bringing out the big guns.
Okay, the big guns.
Yeah.
The tiny guns. Here's the deal.
What's up?
For me, the usefulness of qualia is multitudinous.
That's a big word.
It is a big word. There is a cornucopia
of
uses, a plethora, if you will.
Yes.
Why are all the words for many things so much fun? Sundry, plethora, cornucopia. It's like somebody got that definition, like a lot of things, and just went nuts. Look, okay, here's the deal. It's a useful term because it accurately describes something that I experience. I experience what it is like to be V. In my experience, that's how qualia has been used. So that works for me. That's how I've seen most other people use it. I haven't engaged with apologists on this subject, so it's very possible that I have that blind spot.
Apologists, please email V. Please, please, please.
I'm just going to use my definition, and that's going to be it. But here's the deal.
Just break V over the same wheel that you broke me on.
That sounds very sexual, and I'm uncomfortable now.
I mean, I'm not mad.
The second reason that it is useful is I don't agree with the idea that because some people are dishonestly using a word, we should give up that word and not use it. We should instead come up with a different definition that also describes what that word is without the problematic component.
Or just don't use the word.
Why? It's a perfectly good word with multiple definitions.
No, it's not. The entire reason I'm using it, the entire point, the crux of the point I'm making is talk about your subjective experience. Talk about your unique experience. But when you bring up qualia, you are opening the door to...
When you bring up atheist, you're opening the door to people making all kinds of assumptions.
And I'm willing to die on that hill.
Okay,
I'm
willing to die on the qualia. Clearly.
Cool. So then we're doing it. So yeah, okay. No, that's good. That's fine.
That is a definition that I think is valuable and should be fought for.
Okay.
And thirdly, as we have established through this really cool conversation, there is no unfalsifiable experience of consciousness that meets criteria that doesn't also make AI conscious based on your definition. And
okay.
so in order to...
Hold on. I lost you and I want to be following you. Could you say that again?
There was a point in time where you were like, it is the consciousness is being able to prove that something is conscious, is being able to watch it process and synthesize information.
And
has some kind of brain involved.
And
what?
Building a functional model
that is not falsifiable. You cannot tell if somebody is building a functional model of the world based on watching them synthesize data.
I think you can through studying brain trauma.
I don't think you can. Not in a way that would make conscious beings unique from computers. So the definition that you gave for proving consciousness works for humans, it works for lab rats, and it works for AI. Now, my question is, are we okay with that? Because if so, cool. But I also know that I have a unique experience, and the way that I engage with other beings that I consider to be conscious is assuming that they share the concept of a unique experience. And that is the thing that differentiates other people from AI at this point in time.
Yeah, I don't find that terribly useful for the same reasons I gave before.
You don't find it useful to distinguish between computers and humans?
I mean, if we're granting everything that we just did, then it feels like a similar thing to people saying, well, why are you, it just doesn't sit the same, doesn't sit well.
Well, that's different. And like not sitting well is not the same as not being useful or convincing.
Well, you're right. I'm getting buzzed. Sorry.
All right, you guys, we've got about 15 minutes left. We have 2 more callers on the line. Let's talk with them really fast. We got like super in the weeds here for this last part.
We did. We moved from talking about consciousness to qualia, but we knew that was going to happen.
But it ties back in. How do we know which things are conscious? And I'm positing that qualia, based on the definition I gave, the little asterisk I did there, is the way to prove what is conscious and what isn't.
And I think that the topics that you brought up are useful and worth talking to, or worth talking about, are worth studying. And also, I'm jaded. I'm
scarred from that Philosophy 101 class and conversations with people like William Lane Craig.
No, I don't think it's dishonest. I don't think they're being dishonest. I think that there is a leap being made between a concept or a process existing and a thing ontologically existing. And I don't think that's dishonest. I think that that is just a misunderstanding of ontology. It's a poor epistemology. So I don't think it's dishonest. I think that it is addressing what most of the conversations are going to be. I think there are more people who accept and propose that qualia is tied to the existence of a soul, that there is some unseen, immaterial driver to this meat robot that we are, that it is prevalent enough that I don't want to include it.
But where would God of the Gaps even be if we granted everything that was considered to be proof of God or a soul? Okay, I guess lightning is just, everybody assumes that that's just God's, so we're not going to use the word lightning because we've ceded that word and that concept to the theists.
True, yeah. No, it's a good point. It's what hill are you willing to die on? And personally, I'm not going to engage in a discussion with somebody who's going to take the qualia indicates the soul and still use the word qualia. I don't find it useful, but I understand you do.
I'm very confused. All right, Jacob, you're on the air. We've got about 10 minutes. Give us your quick thoughts.
Hello.
Hello.
Hey.
Hello.
One thing that I like to remind myself that makes it a lot easier to connect with other people is that it's fun to define ourselves as what we are, as monkeys on a rock in space.
Sure.
Yeah.
And I think that we all agree about that, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Well,
Yeah.
apes, not monkeys, but yes. Continue.
it was colloquial. You got what I was saying. But
Yeah.
So about qualia, since we're on the topic, we were talking about consciousness earlier, but it seems like qualia is a integral part to how you define consciousness. So when you look at the components of qualia, how many are there?
Based on the definition that I use, there's the component of experience.
Because if there's, sorry, continue. Sorry.
There's the component of processing things through past experience and the component of processing things through your unique brain function.
Yeah, how many components are there? How many different things are there?
I'm not sure I'm following. There are 2 big categories there that I pointed out.
How many categories are there? That's what I'm asking about.
2.
Two, and those, and the first one is what?
Past experience.
And the second one is what?
Unique brain activity or brain function or neurochemistry.
Uniqueness?
Yeah. So the way that your neurons have attached to each other is unique in comparison to the way that Thee's brain is made up.
So
How do
using
you define unique?
using your brain with your neurochemistry as opposed to someone else's brain with someone else's neurochemistry.
When you in this definition, what are you defining me as?
The person on the other side of this phone?
No, we're making an assumption.
Well, like you,
True.
right? You said your, and I was wondering in the definition that you were giving me when you said your, what? I'm not a part of the definition, right? So you can't include me in it like that. Am I incorrect? I could be missing something.
I'm not quite sure where we're going with this. I would love it if you got to what I'm sensing that you're trying to lead us down a path to make a point. I would love it if we started with the point.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Let me just, because this is all about qualia, so I'm just going to keep asking that question. What are the components of qualia? And I would love for you to repeat yourself because that's kind of what I'm looking for.
Well, we are going to have to move on in a minute, but I will read my definition again, which is the subjective experience.
You have notes?
Yes. The subjective experience of my consciousness processing data using my brain and interpreting it using my experiential history and neurochemistry.
So you is an individual? What is you? Every time you say my, what are you referring to?
This body, the collection of biological and neurological parts.
So essentially you're a monkey on the earth in space.
Okay.
But like that's just, your physical body is that. But like you as your character, as a distinction between those monkeys, is however you define yourself.
Correct.
But we don't know of a consciousness outside of this bubble, right? It's possible that it exists, but we don't know of one outside of this bubble I just explained.
The bubble being the individual?
Or the rock that we're all on?
The bubble being this Earth world. We don't know. We have no idea if there's any other life in the universe. So as far as we can tell, it's just us on this planet. I assume that you agree, right?
As far as we know, there can be no knowing, but sure. As far as we know.
As far as science can tell us, the only place that consciousness exists is here and focused in the monkeys that we call humans. That's where the qualia is.
If he's asking you this question, can you do a one-up? Or
I'm asking you if
the
the only places that you would expect to find consciousness are in monkeys on Earth.
Jacob, we actually have to move on. I would love it if you were to call in on Sunday maybe and have this conversation longer, or maybe write in at Contact Skeptic Generation.
Jacob, it's not your fault.
Yeah.
The gin is hitting my bladder pretty hard.
Yeah, I'm just
not gonna lie.
Not quite following you, but I want to get there.
Are you guys married?
We're getting married.
You're getting married?
Yes, we are.
You're engaged.
V proposed on my birthday. Yeah.
Thank you.
Fantastic. How old are you?
I'm 34.
And I am in my late 20s. Yeah. Jacob, thank you so much for calling in.
Yeah. Take care. Okay.
That was interesting.
Yeah. I can tell that Jacob was on a path, but it's the same problem that we always have, and that is just like putting that into...
I thought that he was on a path, and then we went to outer space, and I got confused. So I'm curious what that's going to look like. And then finally, let's take Sarah in Washington.
Hi, guys.
Hey. So what's your
virtual hug?
Aww. What's your thought on consciousness here?
Okay, so I've been meaning to say this from the start. Consciousness isn't exactly binary. There are different varying degrees of consciousness.
You're right.
And when you're put under from an anesthesiologist, they will tell you are in the lowest state of consciousness. You're not aware of nothing. And in fact, it's deeper than sleep. That said, there is also sentience, which I think is what Eric was looking for. I'm not sure.
I think
sentience and qualia are kind of similar.
Interesting.
I think that is a wonderful distinction. I love that, Sarah.
Okay, so I even had to Google this. I was like, trigger phrase Google, what's the difference between these two? And she was saying that sentience is like more of how you react emotionally to those kinds of things. So I once heard a great physicist talk about the levels of consciousness, sentience, and they stated that a thermostat has some of the lowest levels of that because thermostat, whether analog or digital, it senses two things. It senses the humidity in the air, and it senses hot and cold. So therefore, it does have that, in definitional terms, a sense of that. But is it human? Of course not.
Right. Yeah. And
whereas humans, we sense all different kinds of stuff.
Right. I think that's an interesting thought process to go down. And I think that honestly, if we had gotten to this a little bit sooner, like I feel like that would be
I know.
No, that's totally cool, Sarah. Thank you so much for calling in, though. That's a really interesting take.
Yeah,
Thank you.
yeah, you're welcome.
Yeah.
I'll talk to you guys this weekend.
Sounds good.
Take
Bye.
care. So again, I love when we get to bring in new words, because every time we do that, I get that same feeling that I did when I first learned about the difference between sex and gender. And that is that, you get to add more nuance and complexity and a better understanding of things when you add in more vocabulary. I think if we were to jump into doing that at this point, it wouldn't be as useful, but understanding that means that we're going to have better tools to have a more nuanced conversation next time.
I'm very curious to follow the sentience path and see what that looks like.
Yeah.
All right, we're going to jump into Super Chats and make sure to read out all of these. Thank you so much, you guys, for shooting us a couple bucks. This was so much fun.
It really was. And honestly, this is what we do just in our day-to-day. And so it's not a huge ask for us to kind of share this.
Yeah. But
this has been nice.
Definitely let us know, did you like it? Was this something you'd want to see again, like on a once-a-month kind of cadence? And what you would like us to argue about next.
Yeah.
All right, Sarah Dye donated $5 and says, "Yippee!"
Yay! Mindful Monster sent $5 and says, if the word name had any other name, it would still sound just as namey. I like it.
Yeah. Secular Pagan Mom sent us a little unicorn emoji with $1.49. Thank you.
Gramdoff sent $1.99 and put a little heart from my partner Teresa and myself. Thank you, Gramdoff.
And Teresa.
And Teresa, yes, thank you.
I believe Gramdolf and Teresa have SG buttons. I think they were some of the very first.
Yay!
I think.
You mean we haven't scared them all away?
Scared them all away? No.
Yeah.
Secular by Nature sent $5 and says, "You two are doing a great job. Love the shows and really enjoy the dynamic between you two."
We do too.
Thank you.
Mark Bell sent £8.99, and that's all. Thank you, Mark.
Alexander Nilsson sent $5 and says, "I think that the way to differentiate consciousness from non-consciousness isn't processing stimuli, it's how accurately the reaction to that stimuli can be predicted."
I don't know if I agree. I think that something could be conscious and really stupid.
I also think that something could be very good at we could very accurately pinpoint what a computer is going to do with 2 + 2.
And not have that as an indicator of consciousness. Okay, that's
but
fair.
Interesting.
Yeah, and I feel like maybe workshopping that a bit can give more.
Yeah.
But Gnostic Informant sent $5 and says, would Batman know what it's like to be a bat?
He wishes. Dante Verona sent $20.
He knows what it is to be the night, because he is the night. Hey, Dante.
It's not the pun we deserve, but it's the pun we needed.
Oh, yes. I love you. I love you, V.
Love is a useless emotion based on this conversation, apparently. But I
what?
Too.
What?
Dante Verona sent $20. Thank you, Dante.
Thank you, Dante.
If it ever provokes your curiosity, there's a film about consciousness from 1980 called Altered States, starring William Hurt. I'm not saying it's great, but oh man, is it druggy.
Is it anything like Waking Life? Because I loved Waking Life.
We actually bonded over that the very first time we hung out. We were like,
what's
your favorite movie? And we were both like, oh, it's super obscure. You wouldn't know it.
Yeah, Waking Life. And we were both just kind of looked at each other like aliens.
Like, who are you?
Yeah.
Oh my gosh.
If you haven't seen Waking Life, check out Waking Life.
Very,
the premise
very
of it is, are we dream walking through our waking life or wake walking through our dreams? It's actually somewhat relevant to the conversation. Anyway, Queen of Beams sent $2 and says, appreciate both of you and your vulnerability. Thank you.
Thank you. Jaro T sent $9.99 and says, my anesthesiologist explained to me that being put under was being put into one of the lowest states of consciousness. I was put into a deeper than normal sleep state. I was still medically conscious.
Oh, then I was wrong, and it was my misunderstanding of neurochemistry and biology that was informing that, which means that this entire conversation was useless. No, it just means that I get a better understanding. Thank you for the correction. Melody Kate,
Nope.
or no, Nidemus the Demon sent $10 and says, you two discussing belief, non-belief, etc. has helped me immensely in my deconstruction. Much love. We're so glad. Yay, welcome.
Melody Kate sent $10 and a little fox hugging a heart.
Nat Unsub sent £10 and says, lovely convo, V and Eric. If reading the super chats out loud, can you wish my partner, Theo Fungi, a happy birthday? Hey, Theo Fungi!
Happy birthday!
Happy birthday! He introduced me to the shows you were on before, and I've been watching you ever since.
Thanks, Theo. That's awesome of you.
Yeah.
And we're happy you're here, Nat.
I love it.
Demi Imp sent $5 and says, quote unquote, learning is an important part of consciousness. Computers, AI don't learn on their own yet. I feel like they do, though. That's kind of the point.
In some rudimentary degree, yeah.
Yeah, you would have to define what learning is in this instance.
Because, ooh, that's uncomfortable, isn't it? Matthew Campo sent $9.99, says, keep doing amazing work. So much gratitude. Thank you, Matthew.
Lucas Black sent $10 and a little super bird.
For some reason, I always think of it as a pear.
I don't know why I thought bird. It looks like it's flying.
It does. It's got a little superhero cape and everything. It's adorable. Dante sent another $20. Thank you, Dante. And says, got this from the fake Deepak Chopra quote generator.
I love that thing. Your
consciousness is a spiritual abstract within a symphony of destiny. Always good for a cheap laugh. Just some fictional, ludicrous word salad. Honestly, that your consciousness is a spiritual abstract within a symphony of destiny is just as useful as many Christian definitions of qualia and consciousness.
It's true. It's very well put for a quote generator. It's generating unique information based on prior data. Is a quote generator conscious?
Anyway. Jesse Chappelle. Oh, go ahead.
Jesse Chappelle sent $6.66. In the baking analogy, is consciousness the temperature of the oven or the cake?
The baking analogy is actually the process of baking. It's not the oven itself. It's the process that's going on in that oven. You need that oven to create that process. So when I was talking about consciousness, I wasn't talking about it as something that exists like a cake or an oven, but as the event of the baking, right? The process of that happening. And so when we talk about consciousness, it often gets put into tangible, terms, physical terms. Either it's the oven or it's the cake. But it's much more like, that process, because the process, like we've said before, is...
But is it a physical process or a metaphysical process?
No, it's a physical process, but it is not somehow abstracted and still ontologically existent. And that's the entire point of it, is that, we can talk about the fact that it's an emergent property, but that emergent property is not a tangible thing that we're pointing at, and that's what's important here, at least to me. Would be any closing thoughts?
I'm just excited to get like the bridge of the Enterprise as our screen background and do like a transporter episode and talk about what is personal narrative and how that relates to identity.
Look, I have gone really, really deep into video and audio editing, and I will dedicate myself to beaming us into our chairs.
Oh my gosh.
I would love that.
You guys, this would be amazing. What we're going to do is we're going to have all of these live on their own separate playlist on the YouTube channel, so you'll be able to access these whenever you want. This is not being charged to patrons. This is free content. We're fundraising, but we're not charging you guys. So if you are a patron, don't worry. You're not going to see a uniquely large balance at the end of the month. And then finally, if you liked what you saw here, but you don't know us from other things, definitely tune back in on Sunday at 11:30 a.m. Central, and use the same number that's was used to call us here, 585
526.
Oh God!
8774.
The alcohol is
526
hitting.
8774. And the reason it was awesome is because it's 585 Lemurf.
Yes.
Which is fucking awesome. Also, just as another quick aside, please leave a comment under this video. We are going to be tracking the comments under this particularly tightly because we're determining whether or not this is something that we want to commit to doing.
Yeah.
And so your feedback, what you liked, what you don't like, what you want to see more of, is going to be really, really useful to us in that.
Absolutely. All right. Thanks, everybody.
Good night.
Good night.